Hey there, welcome to Adoption Matters. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We are excited to have a really special guest this week. Dr. Joyce will be joining us. She is no stranger in the adoption community. I am honored to be here with her today, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself.
Oh, thank you so much. I never know how to introduce myself these days. I was adopted as an infant 79 years ago in the dark ages of adoption. And I found my birth family when I was in my early 20s. And I have a wonderful birth family and a wonderful adoptive family. I feel very blessed. I knew that in the 50s and 60s, people were not paying any attention, not even bad attention, to what was going on in the world of adoption. So I made it my business to make it my work. And I went to Harvard. I was going to go to medical school, but I ended up getting 2 masters and a dual doctorate at Harvard. And I did it at Harvard because the work wasn't being taken seriously, and I knew that university was. So, and plus, I didn't want to move. I live in Cambridge, so luckily I got in. And I started 3 different clinics that specialized in adoption and mental health and services pre and post adoption. And it was unusual at the time, and still I think it is, because most people who practice in adoption are connected in some way to a placement agency.
Mm,
And I wanted a place that had nothing to do with placement, only because there can be conflicts of interest.
yes.
I really wanted people to have the right kinds of support and not have it be dependent on whether they would be chosen in some way. So I had one place called PACT, the Pre and Post Adoption Consulting Team, not the PACT that's in California. And mine existed before that. And then I had ARC, the Adoption Resource Center, and we did trainings, annual trainings. And that was really more the focus of ARC. And then the Center for Family Connections was a large clinic with 23 staff and 2 buildings. And we specialized for, 25 years in working with both legal and emotional adoption. I like to say it that way because there are many people who have the same issues psychologically and emotionally, but are not legally adopted. So
Mm,
there's so much more to chat about, but I think we'll probably get to that in your questions.
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I felt so much connection there for myself as a birth mom, stepping out into a community where there really wasn't a lot of care, and knowing that as you're pioneering something like that, you have to really be in it for the long haul if you want to see progress. And that can be discouraging at times, right? I can imagine that your journey included some highs and lows there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It did. And I think also the funding situations go through different stages. And the way that I felt people needed to be treated and supported wasn't always the most cost effective. Um,
Yes.
I also wanted to train people to be adoption competent. So the interns and the staff that were there were being trained, and we often did co-therapy so
Mm,
that a young up and coming therapist would be with the senior clinician and would learn by either using our one-way mirrors or being in the session. And most clinics are fighting to make sure that every single person bills for insurance so that they can, stay afloat. And I just felt it was much more important for people to really learn from their elders and to
mm.
really begin to practice in a way that would really help our population.
And that cost effective piece is really important because I think a lot of what we do as coaches is not always tangible. We can't show that. That can't be included in an adoption package per se as care, because more times than not, they just need someone to talk to. And you can't really show that. And that's genuine, more so than they need a program or something per se. Initially, they just need to be heard. And that's something you are so special at. I had the privilege of sitting in a meeting that you conducted regularly, I believe, for adoptees. And the biggest thing that stood out to me was how heard they all felt. And it wasn't in like these triumphant things. It was in the everyday little things that you had the care and the patience to listen to. And that's what stood out to me the most, is each of these people showing up had real life events, whether they were dealing with a sibling who wasn't welcoming them, or whether there was an issue that came up for them. I was most touched by how heard they felt, because you really understood what they were feeling. And you mentioned another thing there about doing so in an environment that's away from an agency setting. As a birth mom, helping other birth moms, it was very triggering to go back to the agency where you placed in hopes to get support. So 9 times out of 10, they would just avoid it because that was easier than going back there again. So speak into a little bit about how you're able to maybe help people to feel as heard as you are, and some of what's led up to the capacity to do that.
Well, I think that, with 50 years or more in the field of family therapy, as a psychologist, a family therapist, a social worker, a coach, a consultant, and a trainer, one of the most important things is to be able to sit with people and to listen. And to, I think that many people in our constellation don't have the chance to be heard. And like you said, I think that birth parents don't often go back to the agency. It's a painful place where they lost something very precious. And the adoptive parents don't often go back because they had to look perfect to have their babies placed with them or their children placed with them. And so why would they go back to say they were having problems? There's a lot of difficulty in finding the right kind of help. And there are so many people who say they know our population. And whether they're a coach, there's a distinction certainly between the various people who are doing different kinds of work. But if we look at it in as a whole, it's just so important that people can wend their way through some various traces of people who can understand them, who can relate, who can say, not only did I experience this, but I've worked with many, many people who have. And not everyone's the same, but I have seen people dealing with the same thing that you're dealing with. People feel very alone. I love what's his name? Bruce Perry, who's a wonderful trauma psychiatrist. And one of his quotes that I love is, "What's shareable is bearable."
How true.
So simple, but it's so true. If you can sit with people who, shake their head and get what you're saying, it just makes you feel whole. It makes you feel seen. And I think it's so important to give people that and to make sure that they are seen, because I don't know, we're sort of invisible in many instances. We look like we're fine, and and we are for the most part, but we're living with trauma, we're living with loss, we're dealing with issues that, aren't quickly definable to others.
Mm.
And that
The invisible thing, boy, if that isn't a limited belief, I am not enough. I found as I did my own trauma work, I was so surprised at how interrelated me as a birth mom and my son as an adoptee. Same, some of the same limited beliefs that we both have had to resolve in our own different ways.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. So I
You
don't
know,
know. I think it's it's so important to be there. And the hardest things, and you learn this very early on in trainings, the hardest emotions to sit with are deep sadness, because it's just so painful. You can't help. And the way you can help, most people can't sit with that level and that depth of sadness. Just to have someone sit with you makes
Mm,
a world of difference. And the other is rage, anger and
mm,
rage. Nobody wants to be near you when you're raging. But really, anger is a cover for sadness.
yeah.
So you really need someone to sit with you so you can get to the place where you can let the anger go and feel the sadness.
Wow. Wow.
Especially a grief that has no resolve.
Mhm.
That has been, for me, placing and losing a son that passed away. I think those were the two greatest realizations, is that you do have to just sit with it. And very interestingly, my capacity for joy has increased because of my capacity for grief. And that was such an irony that I never would have expected prior. But that is definitely a byproduct of being able to carry both.
Yes.
As you've been talking, Dr. Joyce, and the fact that you are an adoptee, that's what I'm wondering about. You were saying something about how the lived experience that people bring into the table and into the discussion, it really is sort of like the nucleus, or it influences how they feel about things. So it brought me to the idea, or the question really that I have is, how did being an adoptee influence your work?
Hugely. I mean, it's why I chose the work that I chose. And in the 80s, family therapy was just becoming popular. And interestingly, people thought that if you saw a family, you were doing family therapy. But that's not at all true. If you studied family systems, there's a much deeper framework that you needed to understand in order to work with those families. And I was always intrigued by family because, what did it mean to lose your original family, to gain a new family? And I think one of the blessings of my work is that I have a very positive experience with both. I mean, my adoptive family were clueless in the 50s. They were not fabulous in that level, but they were wonderful. They did their very best.
Yeah.
And my birth family, they were encompassing. They were happy to find me after they went through their surprise here and there. Some of them knew nothing, and some knew what had happened. But I feel like it really helped me because I could give to all of those people in a certain way. And yet, I always feel that the adoptee is the centerpiece. Without the adoptee, you wouldn't be talking about any of this. So we've got to constantly keep our focus on that adoptee. And not that the people who are in the other situations, the birth parents, the first parents, the adoptive parents, the fostering parents, any other parents are certainly important,
Yes.
extremely important.
Mhm.
But if we don't focus on that person, that adoptee, we lose focus on what we're doing here. So I think that it is incredibly important to help people to do that and to give them, how do you put your ego aside, especially in open adoptions? How do you put your ego aside and be present when you have strong feelings and maybe negative feelings about it's like in-laws.
Mhm.
When you marry someone, you get in-laws.
Yes.
They might be fabulous and they might be the worst thing that ever happened to you. But you love your partner, so you figure out how to deal with them. And I think we have to do the same thing. We're not necessarily meant to be best friends with any of our families, but for the sake of the child, we're meant to figure out how to do the best possible job.
Right.
And as adoptive parents, we're unlearning that I think we've been at the center for so long.
Mhm.
And that's something that doing internal work, so we realize that the adoptee is at the center. One thing with our group too is that's one of our big messages. We have a trispective approach. We acknowledge that all three need to communicate with each other, and the adoptee is at the center. And I think that would really promote health and healing and wholeness further if that message can. I do think it's pivoting. I do think that is changing. I think hopefully the adoptee voice is getting much more validation and attention as is necessary. But I do know that still is a theme that's out there, that kids are there for parents or people who want kids versus, that's not where it's at anymore, nor should it have ever been that way. But it does take some strength
It
for
does.
people to say, yeah,
And
I'm
I
the
think
most important
the
thing.
entire society has a problem, because if you look at the people who are the worst paid professionals are teachers, childcare workers, child welfare workers, social workers. I mean,
Yeah.
the people who work with children, you would think we would want to elevate their training and elevate their ability to support those families for those children. But we're still way behind with all of that. And you look at some other countries, some Scandinavian countries and other countries, it's possible to do a much better job.
Yeah.
Joyce, tell us what you're up to today to make those changes in your own way.
Well, you know, doing a lovely podcast with brilliant people who are thinking along these lines and trying to make a difference. I'm still doing consulting and coaching. I really love to continue to work with people, and it's interesting to me. I only see 12 to 15 people a week these days, and it's interesting when you get a cohort of people who have the same kinds of issues. To me,
Yeah.
it stands out because if I get three families with the same issue from
Yes.
different places, that's a large percentage. And what does that mean? What's going on in the world that this is what's happening? And
I
what's
love that about you, right? That's what spurs what we do. That
right,
curiosity.
right. And what's happening right now is adult adoptees, 30-ish-year-old adoptees, are sending their 60-year-old, 70-year-old adoptive parents to me
Mm.
because they can't communicate.
Mm.
And most often it's transracial and international adoptees who feel that their parents, who they love, but they just don't feel like they get it.
Mm.
And it's now these adoptees might have children who they're also struggling with, you know, microaggressions and things that relatives are saying that they grew up with, and they don't want their kids growing up that
Right,
way. They,
right.
they really want to train people to pay attention. And so that's it's interesting. I have three families right now that I'm working with, and one of them are they are stars. They're really absorbing everything and taking it in. Not that the other two aren't, but they're having much more difficulty opening their hearts. They're much more resistant and afraid they're being misused in some way by the process. So that's fascinating to me. I'm doing a
Mhm.
bit of writing. I've been doing these little snippets of conversations on YouTube about different aspects of adoption. That's been sort of fun.
Mhm.
Just those kinds of things.
Nice. Nice.
It's extreme. I mean, as you were speaking about how parents appear and how they sit with you and how some are receptive and some are not. I come from the era when same race adoption wasn't common in the Black family. And so having that experience and background, kind of informs me that, you know, having the same race isn't the answer necessarily. My parents did the best they could. Of course, I'm from the ancient ages, just like you. And so they didn't quite have, you know, all the concepts together, and they were listening to Dr. Spock and some other things that were, you know, leading them in the wrong direction. Um, and then having the chance to come together with my biological family, which didn't happen till later in life, you know, it helped to kind of explain to me exactly why what had happened to me had happened, gave me definition. And it's been really helpful in terms of working with other people that are going through the same type of situations to understand where they're coming from and be able to be an ear, you know, for them, and really come to understand from firsthand experience, what it means to be adopted. And I'm so glad that the adoptee voice is now being recognized and heard. Um, but I wondered, you know, when you said something about working with people who weren't legally adopted, were those people of different ethnicities, or were they, you know, just like most of the people you serve?
Many different ways. And I think it's important. One of the things that I did when I started my clinic, my big clinic, I named it the Center for Family Connections. The word adoption wasn't in it because I wanted to make sure that foster families, kinship families, step families, there's a lot of people who have emotional adoptions that aren't, aren't legal adoptions, and for many different reasons. And, certainly in certain cultures, adoption has gone on forever, but it was never legal adoption. You just took care of your niece and
Yeah.
you raised them, and that was the way it was. We've only made it an industry since slowly and then speedily since the 1930s. Before that, there was no such thing. And I think that that's important. I also like what you brought up. I mean, I'm an in-race adoptee. I was adopted right after World War II when there were way too many babies. So they could match you perfectly, same ethnicity, same religion, really match you very closely. And even in that situation, you knew that you were different.
Yes.
And it was evident, even if you could pass, no one would have asked if I was adopted. They would have just assumed I belonged with my adopted family. And I did, but I didn't. There's a
Yes.
way that you belong and there's a way that you don't belong. And certainly being transracially adopted or being very different looking makes it impossible for lies and secrecy
Yeah.
because people have to acknowledge it. Uh,
Mm.
but there's something gained and something lost in both kinds of adoption.
Right.
And I think that the most important thing is honesty, truth, and knowing that it's really something that should happen. I just see so many people that find out they were trafficked or something happened along the way, and it just changes their whole view of why their life is like it is. And they can turn that around over time, but it's really important that we do adoptions that really need to be done. Not everyone needs to be adopted. It's especially legally adopted, to have your name changed, to be taken
Right.
away. Um,
Right. So true. Well, Dr. Joyce, it's been a pleasure, and I'm sure that we can go over a lot more than we have covered today. Other topics, we hope maybe you'll join us again. But thank you so much. Is there anything else anyone would like to say before we close today?
Well, deep appreciation for you and your work over the years, and also for you right now and what you're doing. And thank you for this time together.
Yes.
I think people listening will gain some insight and will be able to. I think this will make a difference. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you so much. I
Thank,
appreciate your insight.
thank you all very much. I'm so glad you're doing the work that you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank
It's
you.
been a great connection. And thank you for joining us today. We hope that you'll join us again at Adoption Matters.